My name's Smethurst and I started in property with absolutely nothing, no connections. I was working on a building site, working long hours, getting up at 5 AM, working in the pissing down rain for £4 an hour and doing it all again and again and again the next day and the next day and the next day. And I had no connections, I had no means to get started in property, and I still managed to build a business that's done multiple six figures in revenue and has sold millions and millions of pounds worth of property in the process. The internet makes running a property business look like you must have had loads of money to get started, or you're just simply faking it. My name's Smethurst and I started in property with absolutely nothing, no connections. I was working on a building site, working long hours, getting up at 5 AM, working in the pissing down rain for £4 an hour and doing it all again and again and again the next day and the next day and the next day. And I had no connections, I had no means to get started in property, and I still managed to build a business that's done multiple six figures in revenue and has sold millions and millions of pounds worth of property in the process. And I've been hounded on for months and months and months to start a YouTube channel, document my journey, show you all behind the scenes of the businesses that I'm operating and running, and yeah, what I actually do and what I get up to day to day, and maybe, hopefully, you can take something from it. My ultimate goal with this YouTube is if I can give back through documenting my journey and showing you how I got to where I am, then I'll be a happy man. So let's get into it. So I started let's start with my pre-property journey. So when I sort of left school, I got no GCSEs at all. So I remember picking up my results on results day, and everyone around me was they were all applying for colleges. They were all, made up, happy, screaming and shouting about their results, their GCSE results that they picked up on results day. I was looking around and I didn't even apply for any colleges, right? I had no idea what I was going to do after school. I think I passed one GCSE, which was fine art. So as you can imagine, the sort of career as an artist is extremely hard. And it also wasn't really one that I was looking to actually take on. I wasn't really interested in becoming an artist, but I was just quite good at art, right? So from there, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I ended up doing a mechanical engineering course in college, just because all my friends were doing it. And I remember one day in college, I was sat there and we were talking about potential salaries in the future once you qualified. And I remember one of the tutors saying that, the potential earning that you can earn on a yearly basis is £40,000. And that's when I sort of had this turning point in my head and thought, you know what, I don't think that's a route that I really want to go down. I don't want to be, slaving away in a factory, filing pieces of metal down and working with big machines and only making £40,000 a year. It got me really thinking about life, and I thought, how is this the only way to, make something out of life? So from there, I was a little bit lost. The year later, my mum actually passed away. So she sadly passed away in 2016. And again, that obviously had a huge toll on my life. I would say that when something like that happens in your life, you can either go one way or the other. Thankfully, I went the other. I know a lot of people around me, when they have lost an important person, they've gone down a really deep hole, and I kind of use that as fuel to actually do something with my life and make my mum proud ultimately as well, because she's always in the back of my mind every day, and it's something that I really take with me on a daily basis whenever I'm dealing with clients, whenever I'm running my business, and it gives me a reason and a motivation as to why I do what I do and what I'm actually doing it for. And ultimately, that's what you need. You need a core reason as to why you're doing anything. So that really set me back, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I thought, I really need to jump back into doing something now. So I decided to get an apprenticeship in site carpentry and joinery. So I was working on building sites. I was traveling to sites every day in Manchester, so I was driving an hour every day in the pissing down rain, getting up at 5 a.m, driving an hour to site, getting out, working on freezing cold, pissing down roofs on the top of large development sites, doing all the construction, doing all the woodwork, and I was literally earning £4 an hour. So I started on £3.95 as apprentice wage. Eventually that started to creep up a little bit. I did that for 2 years. I got some really good hands-on experience, understanding, how to take a site from start to finish, how to, sort of perfect my craft, and I knew that that was something that I could eventually fall back on one day if I needed it, right? And I then decided that I wanted to get out of joinery. I always wanted to get into property, and the main reason for that is because I saw my boss and I saw some of the big developers that we worked for turn up to site in really nice cars. They used to turn up in Audis. I remember one of the guys turned up in a Lamborghini one day, and he would come to site. He would spend about 10-20 minutes on site. He would order people around. He'd speak to the site manager, and then after that he would just simply leave in his nice flashy car, and we'd be there stuck slaving away in the freezing cold, and all for his profit. And I also realized that if the guys that I'm working with are in the 60s and they're still working on building sites and they've got really bad backs, they hate their lives, and it's not something that they want to continue doing, and they're actually telling you this isn't really something that you should want to be aspiring to do for the rest of your life, then it's really something that I should probably look at getting out of. And that's ultimately what I decided to do. And I always used to see these real estate agents, right, on social media. I remember a lot of the time I used to see them on Twitter, which is now X, and I used to message them and I used to say, how do you do what you do? And these used to be real estate agents who used to sell property, right? So they were like mainly American, because at the time there weren't half as many property gurus as there are now. And I used to just message them, right? So I used to see their property tours and I'd message them directly and I'd say, how do I do what you do? How do I get into it? Not knowing from a young person's perspective that, the American real estate agent has no, correlation or similarity to what I even wanted to do in the UK. I just knew that it was in the property industry, and that's all I could see at the time that was sort of surrounding property that had any sort of relevance to actually, working on, from what I got from working on a building site and seeing these big developers turn up in the nice flashy cars. So anyway, I got nowhere with that and I decided to quit my joinery job. And I remember the final nail in the coffin for that was that I actually went to my boss one day and I basically asked him, I said, look, I'm qualified now. I just got my apprenticeship degree, level 2 MVQ. And I said, look, I think it's time for a pay rise. And he basically came back to me and said, well, if I give you a pay rise, then I have to give all of the other apprentices a pay rise. And, I said, well, no, because they're not qualified yet. So what warrants giving them a pay rise? And ultimately, it was down to the fact that they couldn't afford to give me a pay rise. And maybe at the time I probably wasn't ready for it, but I decided that was the right time to leave my job and try to pursue a career in property. Now, I obviously didn't know how I was going to go about that. I started working for a couple of other dead-end maintenance jobs. After that, I worked in a warehouse, I worked in Amazon, I worked for a kitchen company. I have done so many different 9-to-5 jobs, it's unbelievable. And some of them not even 9-to-5, some of them like 12-hour shifts, like crazy warehouse, building sites, sales offices, like anything, you name it, I've probably done it. From there, I decided that I still wanted to just try and pursue getting into property, right? So I was just looking for people who were involved in the industry. And one day, one of my close friends, he sent me a Facebook post of a local property investor, and he was basically recruiting for a labourer to work in his properties. So I thought, you know what, I'll give this a shot. I'll drop him a message. And I basically messaged him and I said, look, I'm not looking to become a labourer, because ultimately at the time in my head, that was kind of beneath me because I was a joiner and I qualified, and that would have been kind of a big pay cut. I said, look, I'm not looking to become a labourer. I'm a qualified joiner. I'm happy to do all of the work in your properties for free if you can sort of teach me and show me how to actually get into the property industry and how to build a property business, how to sell property, how to invest in property, and just how to sort of like immerse myself into it. Anyway, before you know it, the next day we met in Starbucks. We went for a coffee, and before you know it, he gave me the job, and he basically agreed. I think he saw sort of maybe his younger self in me and decided to give me a shot. The next day we started working together. There's so many funny stories about, you know, the start of that journey, but I want to keep it super high level and I want to get straight to the point. So after that, we started working together. I was doing all the labouring, I was doing all the maintenance work in some of his properties for him. Obviously, it was saving him hugely on costs because he wouldn't have to actually employ a contractor to come in and do it. And then after that, well, I basically pitched him and I said, look, why don't we start a property sales business? Why don't we, you know, sort of do this together? Because you obviously have the expertise. You've done it before. You know how to analyze a deal. You know how to find properties. You've obviously got a portfolio. He had about 20, oh no, he had 13 properties by the age of 24. So he had a lot of properties by a young age. So he obviously, you know, had huge drive and determination in himself to be able to get to that point. But he also had crazy amounts of knowledge. He spent around £25,000 on his education to, you know, teach him how to actually get into the property space, how to invest into property, how to analyze deals. Before you know it, we started our property sales business. A month after that, closed my first client, who was a investor from Birmingham, and they ultimately were looking to invest in the north because they knew that their money could go further for them, and they were looking for a partner on the ground who could basically manage that full process. And basically what that means is we would find a property deal for the investor, we'd run all the numbers, we'd do all the due diligence, and then we would manage the full process from start all the way through to the end, managing the refurbishment and then managing the relet on the back end as well. And that process went really smoothly. The client was really happy. They gave us a great testimonial. I was able to sort of get my foot in the door from understanding sort of the life cycle of a deal, how to actually find the deal, how to analyze it, assets and liabilities, you know, how to actually take a project from the very beginning all the way through to the end in terms of the refurbishment. I'd done it myself on building sites, but I'd never actually done it for someone else. So it was great to kind of build that trust with the client and sort of see how that full process plays out. And then from there, it obviously gave me, you know, a lot of confidence to then go and do that again. And we did that again and again and again for a couple of clients. And that's when we started to build really good relationships with agents, right? This one agent came to me and she said, I've got this property. We're about to put it on the market, but I know you're looking for these type of properties. So do you want to view it before it goes online? I said, you know what? Yeah, I want to view it straight away. So the next day, went to view it before it was on the market. Immediately, I got there and it was a property with all boarded up windows. It was absolutely fucked. The whole property was messed up. And that gave me sort of the, you know, the alarm bells in terms of this is the perfect property. And when I started working with the guy who had, you know, the large portfolio, we put a goal in place that I wanted to basically buy my first property by the end of the year. And this was, by the way, this was 2019. I was 20 at the time, so I was 20 years old. And I had a goal to buy my first property, right? And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I had no money. I had no connections. I had no way of getting a mortgage. I literally had nothing. So how on earth was I going to buy a property by the end of the year? And it was probably mid-year. It was probably June time when we put this goal in place. How on earth was I even going to do it? I had no idea. But we had this goal, and you know, I knew I had this expertise from this guy that I was working for. So it's a case of leaning on him for that expertise of how to do it, and then having the sort of drive and determination myself to actually implement the knowledge that he's giving me, right? So we went to view this property, boarded up property, and I put an offer in straight away. And I basically put an offer in on the basis that I wanted to buy that myself, right? And again, like I said, I had no means of how to purchase that property. And I decided, look, I've got a couple of options here. Well, actually, I say a couple. I had one option. My one option was to pitch it to the investor who I previously sold the deal to and manage that full process from start to finish. So I went to them, I pitched it to them. I said, look, I've got this property. I could sell this property deal to you and make maybe £5,000, but I really want to do this myself. And because I kind of built a really good relationship up with them through that process, and because they sort of met me in person, they understood that I was young, so they probably could see like my drive and determination, and maybe they seen their younger self in me as well. They knew also, because we had this discussion and I told them about my goal to sort of be in their position one day and buy my first property by the end of the year. And I basically just said to them, look, I want to buy my first property by the end of the year. I had this deal. I went to them and I said, look, I could sell this to you for £5,000, but I want to buy this myself. Would you be interested in putting the money in, and I'll give you a percentage return of interest per annum? Which at first they was sort of like and ahhing. They wasn't quite sure. They liked the deal, so they were actually interested in buying it themselves. However, after some sort of to and fro, they agreed that that they'd fund the money to me, basically. So they lent me the money to buy that property, and I give them a percentage return on that money. And bear in mind, I was 20 years old at this point, so they were trusting someone who, pretty much had no property experience. The only experience I had was obviously managing the refurbishment and actually sourcing that property to them. So they trusted me to carry out that process, and they sort of maybe seen me as a bit of a not an authority or not an expert, but they knew I knew my patch, and they knew I could follow through in terms of the construction on the back end of, and actually taking the site from start to finish. And that's when they agreed to lend me the money. So I agreed that deal, and the worst thing ever happened after that. And that was that COVID hit. So I got the offer accepted in, I think it was maybe September, October of 2019. And then the COVID talk started to happen in I think it was maybe November, December time. And then we went into lockdown, I think it was February 2020. And that was actually when I completed on the property. So I completed on that property in 2020, February time. And the whole world went into lockdown. Estate agencies stopped working, construction workers stopped working. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was really stuck. So what I then decided to do was get stuck in myself, because obviously I had the experience. So I called on a couple of my friends. I said, look, I know it's lockdown. Let's crack on. Let's get into the property and let's try and do as much work as we can. And that's what we did. So, I started, basically ripping it all out, started doing as much as I could physically as possible without sort of having to order, thousands and thousands of pounds worth of supplies, and just moving it along ready for when the tradespeople started to work again. Anyway, cut a long story short, that project actually finalised. My original sourcing business started to fail. And the reason why that is because I was sort of running that as a property-led business. So that means that I was putting in about 40 offers every month. Our ratio was actually about 40 properties viewed to 2 properties offers accepted, right? And that's because the deals that we were striving to actually purchase were sort of like all money out deals, so to say. So they were buy, refurbish, refinance deals, value add deals, deals that were more targeted for sophisticated investors. But of course, at the time, investors stopped investing and agents stopped working. So we were no longer able to actually, get these offers accepted. We weren't able to speak to estate agencies, and we weren't able to actually, progress our business forward. So I was kind of stuck, and I was kind of wondering what I was going to do at that point. I completed on the renovation, which took way longer than expected, went way over budget. Managed to, in the end, make a healthy profit and pay back the investor. So I made around £30,000 on the first deal, which was net profit. And that was net to me after everything, after paying back the investor. But, I also understood that, okay, I've got a little bit of capital here to go again, but I still need cash flow, right? And my business wasn't cash flowing because the market completely changed. Prices skyrocketed. The deals that we were, you know, striving to get, and the business that sort of the deals that our business was ran on were no longer viable and no longer feasible to actually obtain anymore. So then I decided to go back to work, and I kind of had this thought process as to, if I'm going to go back to work, I don't want to become a joiner. I want to actually sharpen my sales skills, right? So I then decided to work in a off-plan sales consultancy and start my corporate sales journey, so to say. So then what I did is I started working for a company selling off-plan, and my role was an opener. So I was making about 300 to 400 cold calls every single day, and my goal was to get 1 or 2 leads out of that 300 to 400 calls. So you can imagine how terrible the data was and the leads that we were calling. And you know what it's like, right? So, you know, how many people who are probably watching this video who have had, you know, random people call them up and say, oh, are you interested in buying this? You're interested in buying this? And you just, you know, you probably tell them where to go, and you put the phone down. That's what it was like for me 300 times over. And I had to hope that 1 or 2 people were interested in order for me to make money. So I was really, and my team in that business was really scraping through the shit. And I then soon sort of understood sales and what it means to sell and the whole sales process, right? From an opening position to actually opening the call to basically, you know, introduce these opportunities to prospects who didn't have a clue who I was or what the offering was or who the company I was working for was as well. I soon then became the top performer or one of the top performers on my team. And I just remember one day thinking like, okay, like this is good cash flow. Like I'm earning, you know, okay money. But ultimately, like I still had that drive to run my own business, right? And I knew I was gaining some really good sales experience. I knew I was good at what I did. But I wanted to run my own thing again. And I remember one day, like, we were on the dialer. We used to wear a headset. A name would pop up on our screen, and we'd say, "Hi, whatever your name is. It's Jordan from XX company. This is what we do. This is the offer. Are you interested? Blah blah blah." And I remember sat there pitching one day, and it was raining outside, and I looked across the room to one of my teammates, one of my friends who I built up a good friendship with at the time at the company. And I said, look, you know, what are we actually doing here? Like we've been here now for about 10 months, right? And yeah, we were hitting good leads, we were hitting good targets. You were getting the dopamine of getting the leads and hitting the targets, but you know, there was something missing. And I looked across to him and I said, look, you know, we were consuming a lot of content about Dubai at the time. Probably not as much content as there is right now about Dubai. But I used to see a lot of real estate agents, and it kind of took me back to the beginning of that journey as to seeing these agents in America and now seeing the same people who were doing it in Dubai, right? And I heard stories of people who I knew who went out there and they're making, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I said, you know what? I looked to my mate across the desk and I said, why don't we just move to Dubai? We had a bit of a chat about it, and then a couple of months later, we actually did move to Dubai. So what I did is I quit the job, cold calling, selling property, and I decided that I wanted to become an estate agent for a little bit before I moved to Dubai, basically just to get a sort of a full 360 circle, so to say, of experience and the full cycle of selling property in all different ways. So I'd done it for myself on the sourcing perspective on a property-led basis. I'd done it in an off-plan sales consultancy opening. And then I wanted to also understand the transaction from like a vendor's perspective, from a seller's perspective, and understand how that worked, right? So I then decided to sort of become an estate agent, a local one to me, for a little bit. So I worked there for about 6 months' time, and I, you know, understood the negotiator role inside out, understood sort of the sales cycle, I understood that it's very much a soft sales job and an admin role when you're in a estate agency, and there's not a huge amount of money in it in the UK unless you actually own one. So that again gave me more desire to then just go out and do it on my own. And then we eventually moved to Dubai, had really good success in Dubai. I was working there for about 6-ish months time. And, you know, I had a lot of success, but ultimately I think, you know, I was still working for someone else, and that was sort of my first closing role. And I learned a lot at that company, and there were a lot of sort of niggling thoughts in my head of really just wanting to get back to the UK, be back with family. I had crazy levels of anxiety at the time, which was really strange because I went over there with an awful lot of money from the sale of the property that I sold. I say awful lot of money, but at the time, to me, because I was so young, I was 21 when I moved to Dubai, it was a lot, right? But I just had crazy anxiety, and I don't know why. I think maybe it was because I knew my family, you know, are getting old, and like I was away from family. I was so young, and you know, I was closing deals over there. So it wasn't the fact that you know, income was uncertain. It was just maybe a strange condition that I had and mindset that I had, and maybe it was because I was so young and I was out of my comfort zone. And you know, ultimately, I always have the mindset to just push through my comfort zone and just get into scenarios that I'm uncomfortable with, because I know ultimately that'll build me as a character and build me as a person. So that's always what I'd strive to do. And maybe I kind of took on too much, but I also had in the back of my mind my family back at home. So I decided then to move back to the UK. And I was still selling a little bit of Dubai real estate when I was in the UK for myself. But ultimately, like, I always knew I wanted to start my own business again. So I got back to the UK and I decided, look, I want to get started with my own business. So I started my property sales journey and built it back up. And I had a sort of realization when I was in Dubai as to, look, I've done the opening, I've worked in an estate agency, I've worked in a Dubai real estate company, so I understand now every different cycle and every different side of the transaction of selling a property. So there is no way that I can start a business right now and it not be successful, right? So that's what I decided to do. I then got recruited for a company, actually, who were a large national property franchise company. And my role was to come on and help the franchisees sell property deals. So I was using my expertise and my knowledge to help partner with them and sell properties with them and for them. And that gave me sort of, again, more realization as to why I need to just be doing this for myself. And eventually I sacked that off completely and I went all in. But along that journey, because I'd worked with so many property sales agents and because I'd understood the sales cycle from all these different angles, I really understood that the deal sourcing world and the property world is very, very broken, in the fact that all of these people and all of these deal sourcing coaches, they're teaching people the wrong ways, right? They're teaching people the wrong ways of how to actually get into property sales and start a property sales business. And the reason for that is because they're teaching you how to run a property-led business. And, you know, they're doing that because they know that it's the best way to make money in property and the fastest way and the lowest barrier to entry to get started into property. And it's very easy to teach someone how to analyze a deal and put it into a Facebook group and just view as many properties as you can and how to view properties and what to look out for. But they didn't really have the systems, the processes, the operations that these larger big corporations have, and the companies that I'd worked for, and the companies that are scaling to like multiple 6-7 figures and then are able to then reinvest their profits into building their own portfolio. And that's ultimately what I wanted to do, right? I want a cash flowing business which can supplement my property investment business. And that was the ultimate goal for me, right? So I decided that if I was going to start my sales business again, I need to adopt different systems. I need to adopt a different perspective and a different way of looking at it. And that's what I decided to do. So I knew that the property sales system was broken. I knew that I couldn't be property led. I knew that I couldn't spend so many hours of my time just running around, viewing loads of properties and putting offers in and just hoping that they'll get accepted. And then actually when they do get accepted, hoping that I can sell it to investors in Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. So then I actually implemented something that I like to call the investor-led system, an investor-led advisory, a consultancy, a proper business. And that's where we sort of like dialed in on working with investors, helping them build their portfolio, helping manage that full process for them from start to finish, and actually acting as an advisor and leaning into a specific niche. So I run my property sales business like a agency, like a marketing agency, in the fact that I have a core offer, I have a niche, and I lean into that as much as I can. And I only work with clients who align with my offer. If they don't align with my offer, I might refer them to another agent who's inside our network, or I will just simply turn them away because it will be more hassle for me than what it's worth to work with them. And they just don't align essentially. So they're not my target demographic. And, you know, it's actually, it costs people more hassle than it's worth trying to operate in every different sector, trying to source every strategy, trying to source nationwide throughout the UK, because then you become someone who is not an actual expert in anything in particular. You just are someone that sources property deals, right? And ultimately that shift alone, going from property-led to investor-led, changed my whole business and has changed my life forever. I now prioritize relationships over anything else in anything I do. And now I just focus on working with investors. I don't even care about good deals. The deal is absolutely irrelevant to my business and to my offer, and also to my clients, because often they don't know even what a good deal is, right? And it has absolutely changed my business and my life forever, implementing these investor-led systems into my business. I've been able to now scale my business. We've got our head office that is in Warrington, the property investment agency, which we're able to bring clients to. We've got staff, so I've got VAs and I've got a guy on the ground who's actively viewing properties and managing refurbishments if any are needed. And we're actually able to now scale a business that doesn't need me to actually be in the UK, and ultimately run a business that gives me time freedom, location freedom, unbelievable cash flow, and a business that actually prioritizes relationships and gives me enough cash flow to actually enable me to then reinvest that revenue and that profit into my own property portfolio, but also actually, you know, sort of cultivate great relationships with these investors to fund my own property deals as well. And I've worked with over 1,000 investors in total. All of these guys I maintain an amazing relationship with. You know, if they ever want to do joint ventures, they always come to me first. And if they ever want to invest in the UK market, wherever they're located, if they're based in the UK or if they're based overseas, they're always going to come to me as their go-to guy, because I act as an advisor, I act as a specialist, I act as a consultant, and I consult on building their property portfolio. So I am the main guy for property, whatever it is that they need. And then when I'm building my property portfolio and I'm looking to raise finance, these are the people that I go to, because I prioritize the relationship and I'm not just looking to sell one-off deals and move on. And that's the shift that changed my whole business forever and changed my life. And, you know, I'll be forever grateful of the experience, the companies that I've worked for, the people that I've worked with, and, you know, all of the wisdom that I've picked up throughout the years, the resilience that I've built in the sales jobs, and all of the knowledge that has put me in the position to be able to actually do this, to build this business, to build a network with the property club that we've built, and to help other people ultimately do the same as well, because that's the goal. You know, a lot of people are now getting taught in the wrong way from all of these property gurus and property coaches, and I absolutely hate it. It needs to change. Like, people are teaching people how to fail because they're teaching people the wrong methods, outdated advice, and they're ultimately teaching people strategies and things that they aren't actually doing or implementing on a daily basis. Because look, if you're a property coach, right, then how can you teach someone how to run their own investment agency, consultancy, advisory, if that's not what you're doing on a daily basis? Yes, you can teach them how to find deals, but how to actually run one of these businesses is not your expertise. And this is what all of these people are actually teaching you. So we just do things very differently. And anyway, I know I've been rambling on for a long time now, and it's getting absolutely freezing here in Marbella. It's about 7 to 8 p.m. And I need to go and get some food. So if you are in property, if you're in the property game, you've seen a little bit of success, maybe it's a little bit inconsistent, maybe you are looking to see what's changing in the property world, in the next video, I'm going to break down exactly what is happening in 2026 and exactly what replaces the old deal sourcing model and exactly how to run a high cash flowing property sales business in 2026. And I'll see you on the next one.